becoming, part of this morning I was with the chief here for a little bit. And I think I took your place on the front porch this morning, by the way.
You did.
But you talked a little bit about it. But, the mental health overlay into public safety is a significant issue in the state because your law enforcement officers are becoming your frontline mental health officers in many ways. And the criminal justice system is becoming the conduit for people to receive mental health treatment as opposed to the existing structure, which is also not the way it's supposed to work. And so if you think about the role of a probate judge now, I mean, it's very significant because they are arbiters of whether or not somebody has their liberty interest taken away for an inpatient commitment versus an outpatient commitment. And so it's an important role.
It has no training.
Doesn't necessarily have any training. Yeah, I mean, it depends on obviously that person that's coming in.
That surprised me.
And I don't know how that is in other states.
There was a bill last term that was in the legislature that didn't get out of committee that required that. And I think you had a lot of the people who, and I think it was actually kind of written by Bill English down in Lee County, who thought you needed it. He'd seen too many cases of some things they had to mop up, and but then of course the other probate judges kind of got away from it.
But we've seen the deficiencies in the mental health system just in the study that we've done on opioids now over the last 5 months. Is that there's truly this black hole that exists in people being able to receive help, and so I know that's a significant issue for Commissioner Brashear and what she's trying to do, and for us when we're now trying to encourage people to get help on opioid addiction is for people to be able to know that there's some resources available and there's not this backlog, because it's sad again where many times I was a prosecutor for 20 years, DA for 16, and you'd have moms and daddies that would come into your office and say, Johnny or Sally is subject to an addiction, what can I do? Well, if they stolen from you, well, yeah, they've been forging checks. Well, prosecute them. Let's get them into drug court. Let's get them into sort of they talk about it being coerced treatment, but there's almost greater access for somebody in the criminal justice system to mental health services than there is for somebody that's outside. And so it seems odd in some ways to encourage an arrest, but sometimes people call an arrest a judicial intervention, and it's a way of potentially trying to get somebody help. Because I will say this, the drug court program and then the diversion courts, whether it be mental health as well and veterans courts, are probably some of the best things going in the state to be able to change lives and change behavior.
That's not unique to Alabama.
No, that's a national thing, yeah. I mean, clearly. And what is interesting about this opioid issue as an overlay in that area is that typically if you came into a drug court, or you're on probation for that matter, and you're addicted to methamphetamine or you're addicted to cocaine, I'm going to tell you got to be abstinent. You're going to test drug-free to be able to stay in a program without being a violation. Well, this opioid addiction, and we're talking about heroin, fentanyl, and prescription opioids, is a little different in that what we're hearing from research is abstinence may not be the way to go, but in fact you may need medical-assisted treatment, which can be Suboxone, it can be Vivitrol, it can be methadone. And so we're having to, I think, internally within that world, are we going to allow a non-abstinent person to be inside the drug court system? And I think there's not uniformity in the state, and that's a discussion. It actually is a recommendation that came out of that task force to be able to examine that question so that judges can say, if the research tells us the most effective way of getting you clean is medical-assisted treatment, then we're cutting our nose off to spite our face to get them in and get them abstinent when they potentially are going to relapse quickly and may end up falling off. Because the other thing that's scary, the data tells you that the most likely connection of somebody that overdoses is the fact that they were either recently incarcerated or they're subject to the criminal justice system in some way. And part of that is because when we've gotten them abstinent and drug-free for a while, and then they go back in a relapse setting, they believe they're going to take as much drugs as they used to take, their body has adapted again, and so they take that fentanyl and it kills them. And so anyway, I think we've got some legitimate discussions there, even within what is the most effective thing going about, do we have to modify our practices to be reflective of what's going on with the most current treatment? Yeah.
Back to kind of like the generalities of the thing. Tell, for folks who don't know, I mean, Attorney General, what all does it encompass, and what is the scope of that title?
It's, I guess, far beyond than I probably initially expected. Coming out of the prosecution world, familiar with the fact that they are responsible for criminal appeals that are handled throughout the state. That there's a very much the title of chief law enforcement officer in the state in that role. But what I think has been interesting, the first official act that I took as Attorney General was to sue the state of California. That has nothing to do with public safety. It had to do with California adopting rules that if you're going to import eggs into our state, they have to basically be free-range chickens, organically fed. Anyway, that was an eye-opener to me initially, to be able to see that not only do you have very much this criminal justice sphere, but then there also is the ability to make sure that you're standing up for the rule of law. And that what I envision the AG being typically is really just sort of a balls and strikes guy, not a policymaker. My job is not to be able to think what I believe the law should be, but in fact to make sure that I'm enforcing the law as written. And I take my lead from what the legislature establishes in the Code of Alabama, and then we sort of go forward. And so what we do have is the ability not only, again, to impact the criminal justice side and be involved in programs that we think matter on issues that affect the state, like what we're seeing with the violent crime rate when we talk about human trafficking, those type of things. But also, I had the privilege of being able to file an amicus brief on behalf of the city of Pensacola. Well, why does that matter? Well, Pensacola's got a cross in a park for 26 years, and they're being challenged constitutionally whether or not that is appropriate. And so we get to stand up for issues like that as well. And so, I really think, and it's kind of a little bit of a buzz phrase, but the Attorney General is about the rule of law. And we need to make sure that both inside and outside the state of Alabama, we have the ability to enforce the rule of law.
That it leads to a lot of different things. There are so many things that your office is responsible for, and from the investigators that you have, and all the way down to forensics that you need for appeals and those sorts of things. We see a lot of lag time, so therefore the court cases don't go as fast as I'm sure y'all would like.
Sure.
What is there an answer to solving some of those problems? I know money is the answer, but I mean, how do you improve those things without sacrificing others?
A couple things. One of the areas that we identify as a deficiency, and partly what we're doing with our violent crime initiative, is to make sure that we push resources down to the local level, whether it be expertise, best practices, or actually physical resources. One of those is that we were in one community in North Alabama that had 6 different unsolved murder cases, each of which had barely been worked, half of which had cell phones that had never been examined. And so there was very much, for law enforcement, this lack of ability to have forensic expertise. And so we established that computer forensic lab here, I guess it's been about a month ago now. So we have 4 full-time investigators that are serving as that resource for local law enforcement. It's one of the things we talked to the chief about today. So that hopefully will help bring justice quicker in some ways, and as far as solving crime. And then beyond that, I have the privilege of being able to appoint the director of forensic science, although I don't have any supervisory authority. That sounds strange if I say that's a good thing, but the reason why is you want your forensic science department to be independent of law enforcement, so that there's no allegation of bias, that in essence that forensic scientist that is testifying to DNA in a courtroom is not going to say I work for the Attorney General, right, because that means that potentially you may be prosecution biased. Right. And so you need an independent forensic science, although again, I'm the one responsible for appointing that person. They can only be removed by the governor for cause, is the way that we've structured in Alabama. But forensics has had their challenges on both toxicology and on drug chemistry. One of the reasons why on drug chemistry has been, again, this rise of the issue we're seeing with opioids, whether it be the testing of pills, the testing of heroin, and the testing of fentanyl. It has kind of had this explosion in the number of cases that are going to them. And so one of the challenges that we had when we were interviewing people to come into this position is to say, how are you going to prioritize? How can you help, and how can you assist? And one of the things that sort of has developed from that is really kind of this partnership between forensic science and law enforcement and prosecutors to be able to say, let's make sure that we're testing what needs to be tested on those contested cases. And if you, in fact, have resolved something, or there's that diversion court, like drug court we were talking about earlier.
Tell us so we
Yeah,
can move
exactly. So don't let us spend our resources in testing that. So, that I think has produced some tangible results. The other area that they are continuing to work on is DNA and the lag of being able to get the DNA results. It doesn't happen instantaneously. People see way too much CSI. Somehow or another we can grab it out of the air and we immediately put it in a computer and bam, it's done. It doesn't happen like that. But the person that we selected, Angela Delamana, is one of the renowned DNA experts in the country, and so that's very much a passion for him. And what we have seen, and actually I met with Jeff Sessions a week ago, and I'll see him again this Friday, is they're attempting to push down federal resources to our labs to be able to deal with the DNA backlog. And so we hope that that'll make a difference also.